Donald J. Trump is now President of the United States. President Obama is the ex-president. And Mr. Trump, for the moment, steps away.
Good morning, USA, and good evening, fellow Europeans. How's it going?
Let me say, guys, that the American elections have been felt through the West, especially on university campuses, and I tell you that by personal experience.
Irrespective of what you think, Trump's victory is a prime example of resilience and marketing. In any case, what are we going to talk about in this episode for the viewers who just tuned in?
We are going to give our predictions in a purely critical manner on Trump's foreign policy, especially focusing on different regions, which vary from Europe to Middle East. And we're going to discuss how they are affected, what it means for them to have Trump leading the United States, and we'll critically comment on that.
Without further ado, let's start this.
Perfect. Let's start off with a little recap of the elections. Our predictions, surprisingly enough, were correct. So it means university is working and that we have some knowledge, because we all predicted that Trump was going to win, and he did win. We were wrong in terms of percentage, because we were saying it was going to be a knife's edge. Instead, Trump literally wiped the floor with Kamala. Right now, as the time of recording, he has 301 electoral votes, which is a lot, versus Kamala Harris having 226. Plus, he won all the swing states, which was actually a hypothesis that we mentioned briefly, but we were all saying, no, it's impossible. And yet it was possible.
All right. So now let's look at some of the people that Trump will be nominating or will probably be nominating. So, of course, some of them have already been nominated. Of course, there's J.D. Vance, who is the vice president. And he is a former venture capitalist and author of an infamous book where he talks about his couch. But anyways, he was also a soldier in Iraq, where he served in a non-combat role. And he performed surprisingly well during the vice presidential debate. Now, he also has chosen Susie Wiles as chief of staff, and she has already led the campaign team. Now, there are a lot of rumors about the following figures, but they will most likely be nominated to some kind of position. Of course, most famously, we have Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who will allegedly be employed to address specific health matters, given that also Kennedy said that he would push to advise all U.S. water systems to remove fluoride from public water. So I guess we'll see whether that happens. Then we have Vivek Ramaswamy, who as a biotechnology entrepreneur would take a role, or could take a role, I should say, in the Department of Commerce or a technology-focused post. Then we also have Marco Rubio, famous from the 2016 campaign, who is a strong candidate for Secretary of State or another foreign policy role given his experience in that department. Then, of course, we have the famous or infamous billionaire Elon Musk, who is the Secretary of Cost Cutting, as he put it, and he will probably do the same thing as he did on Twitter, with Twitter and other organizations that he's taken over, if he is awarded a cabinet position. However, Musk may decide that he is better suited for an oversight role, and that makes sense given all the other things he's up to. Then we have Doug Burgum, and his experience in managing North Dakota's natural resources positions him as a suitable candidate for Secretary of the Interior or Energy Secretary. He's likely to focus on balancing energy development with conservation efforts, overseeing public lands, and implementing policies that support both economic growth and environmental stewardship. Now, former Democrat Tulsi Gabbard may have some role in the team, and Kevin McCarthy, who I believe was Speaker of the House, may also have some role in the team. But now let's look at some of the reactions from Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, and other leaders.
So yeah, basically, as we said in introduction, the American elections echoed all over the media across the world, and leaders from many countries, from Europe and so on and so forth, reacted. Starting from the homeland of the election, the United States, basically Kamala on November 6th called Trump, congratulated him, and conceded the victory. Which is interesting because we know that Trump a priori said he was going to refuse the victory, so it's we can say more democratic what Kamala did. Then we had Biden's speech on November the 7th. It was actually a great speech, probably the best speech I've ever heard from Biden, where he acknowledged Donald Trump's victory, invited also him to the White House, and ensured a peaceful transition in January. Coming to our continent, or at least mine and Alice, from the European Union, von der Leyen and Metsola both congratulated Donald Trump. Von der Leyen underlined how the EU and the US are more than just allies, whereas Metsola raised a certain interesting point, because she wrote on, I think on X, Europe is ready, which is like a sort of a warning to the United States, whatever Trump is going to do, Europe is ready. I don't know. Still in Europe, NATO, Rutte said that it would work alongside Trump to advance peace through strength through NATO. Italy, France, UK, and Germany, basically the leaders, prime minister, whatever, just congratulated him and told him they are willing to strengthen transatlantic relationships. I think one of the first, if not the first, to congratulate Trump was Orban, who stated that Trump's success is a much-needed victory for the world. Then we go to Turkey, where also Erdogan congratulated Trump, calling him my friend Donald. And lastly, in Europe, Ukraine, basically Zelensky congratulated him and stated on X his appreciation of peace through strength. Hoping that this will help Ukraine and so to solve the situation with Russia. Going to the contenders of the United States, obviously Russia, China. Putin congratulated him only on Thursday, as well as Xi Jinping. Putin praised his bravery during the attempted assassination, and he said he's interested in restoring the relationship with the United States. Whereas Xi Jinping just congratulated and said that, and called for both nations to find the right way to get along. He received obviously congratulations also from Taiwan, from the government of Taiwan. Whereas lastly, in the Middle East, from Israel, obviously Netanyahu as well as Orban was one of the first in the world to offer Trump earthy congratulations and to post on X like this is a huge victory. He received congratulations also from Palestine, from a PLO chief Abbas, who stated that, and I quote, "We are confident the United States will support under your leadership the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people." Whereas lastly, I think there's Iran. Iran's spokesperson said that the elections of the United States matter nothing to Iran, meaning that whether Kamala or Trump was going to be elected made no difference for Iran and also for the United States in terms of policies. And I conclude with Hamas, also senior leader of Hamas, said it is an internal matter of the Americans, and Palestinians just look for an immediate cessation of the aggression. Now, guys, we received a comment from our boss Gaia, who, knowing that we would have been biased, wanted to have an input on this. So, joke aside, I'm gonna read it. She told us, "I didn't necessarily have a clear expectation, but I did hope that Harris might become the 47th US president, hoping that Americans were ready for a woman into the role. As for Trump, it's not only about what he will be actively do, but also about the broader consequences. His commitment to a strong, safe, and prosperous America brings adverse effects worldwide, spanning to the economy, to security, to environmental concerns. As Europeans, we should seize this moment to move from a reactive stance to a proactive one. Surely, these require significant reforms, but I firmly believe we have the potential to be independent in economic and security matters. When it comes to the environment, which instead requires a global response, we can only hope that America acts with wisdom for the sake of global concerns and not exclusively in its own interests." So we thank Gaia for his comment, and we may now start critically analyze point by point, step by step.
All right, perfect. After that poor analysis of Gaia, I'm just joking in case you're hearing this. She actually raises some points that we're going to touch on in this video, starting with the US-EU relations. I think that we can divide it into three main scenarios: worst case, realistic case, and best case. Starting off with the worst case, that would create a division of the EU and sort of end the globalization that we have. That's like an absolute fatalist, pessimistic view. But some, in fact, many people hold. Even by the way, in my university, I've heard many people talk about trade wars and a very rough time. And I also heard it in overall social media, on social media, sorry. Anyways, there could be in Europe where Meloni and Orban are sort of the tip of the spear in terms of going towards Trump and pushing for a more sovereign state approach rather than a institutional approach that the EU is known for. And that could also cause a division on Russia, because again, Trump might be more lenient with Russia, while the EU lately has not been lenient. Plus, as I mentioned, there could be a trade war, and that's the worst view. Micah, do you have a quick comment on this? Give me like out of 10, how much do you think this would be likely?
Yeah, when it comes to the end of globalization, I very much doubt that because it's a whole, system, and one guy can't really change that. As for the EU being divided, I can somewhat see that, not really with Meloni, but maybe with Orban a little bit. But at the end of the day, I think that this is a bit exaggerated. I don't think that there's much of a chance of most of this
Okay.
happening.
Ale?
Well, I mean, I kind of agree with Micah. The end of the globalization was a point I inserted in the script just because I've heard about it from the other people around me in my campus, meaning that now Trump is gonna close the America, go to protectionism, and globalization goes away. But I think it's too exaggerated. The United States are very influential, but cannot like change the entire world. The European Union has achieved a sort of, at least economic identity, which could kind of leave alone without the United States, at least partly. We have China, we have Russia, which for sure, if the United States are gonna go protectionistic, then they're gonna try to have relations with the European Union.
Yeah, makes sense. Also, maybe we should also mention that Meloni specifically has been blamed as sort of like this populist, chaotic woman. Well, she actually has been pretty good at mediating with the EU institutions to her detriment, because many of her party, many of her followers think that she's becoming too institutional. It's just a side note. Moving on to the best case, which I also think is unrealistic, would be that there would be a great cooperation between Trump and the EU. Some say actually that tougher time with Trump would then lead us to the third scenario, which is a sort of changing of approach, a adapting of the EU towards Trump, meaning so they had stance A until now. Now that there's Trump, the EU will adapt to stance B, and not completely overhaul the EU, but definitely be more lenient with him. And we could call this sort of damage control. And I do believe the EU is great at mediating, at being diplomatic, sometimes too much. But definitely, this is, I think, the most realistic scenario. There might be some tariffs going on here and there, but not like 200, 300%. That's too much. Actually, that could bring us to Ukraine, Micah. I leave the floor to you.
Yeah. So, of course, when it comes to foreign policy, one could argue that actually Trump's policy regarding the Russia-Ukraine war might be his most controversial. And so I think it's important to delve into what the different options are here now that he has become president. So we'll start off with the worst case. And the worst case is basically complete withdrawal by the United States from the entire conflict. So, of course, we know that Trump has said some pretty extreme things. For example, he has said that he will actually encourage Russia to invade NATO allies that do not spend 2% of their GDP on their defense. And while this is a wild claim to make in any scenario, now that he's president, it's much more consequential. And while I do think that that basically is impossible because, first of all, how would he have the resources and the ways to do that? And if he did that right, like calling his one of America's biggest enemies to attack America's allies, almost certainly that would result in him getting out of power in some sense. But nevertheless, though, we can see something a bit more realistic, although still I would not say the most likely option, which is that Trump decides to withdraw all support for Ukraine. Because after all, we know that Ukraine is mainly dependent on American aid and American supplies to win the war. Now, despite Ukraine being in Europe, the European Union has done almost nothing really to help out Ukraine in any meaningful sense. And so they alone could not do much to help them survive against Russia. Now, we might ask ourselves, why would Trump do this? Well, a lot of Republicans are against helping Ukraine. And I believe that this is a combination of them not really seeing Russia as actually against their own values, especially because Russia is socially conservative, as well as because they believe that Ukraine is a corrupt country where the money is not being spent properly. So what would happen if Trump actually does this? Well, I think that Ukraine would inevitably be forced to actually give up some territory. Now, we know that they de facto gave up Crimea, but that could become official where Ukraine has to give up their claims on Crimea. And I think that at the very least is what would happen. But it is also distinctly possible that they would have to give up the 4 oblasts that Russia annexed, in which case Ukraine would basically become no, actually it wouldn't become a landlocked country, but it would definitely lose most of its access to the sea. And then to make things worse, Trump could also lift sanctions on Russia. But again, this is the worst case scenario. Now, if we look at the best case scenario, nothing actually changes. The amount of money being and weapons being supplied to Ukraine stays the same. And well, things pretty much go on as they have. I mean, one could say even in a utopian vision, maybe Trump sends you more aid to Ukraine. But I don't think that's super likely either. So I think the realistic thing is that it's a bit hard to predict just because Trump himself is unpredictable and also because he would have to work within the US Congress. But he could pressure Ukraine through a gradual withdrawal of funding so that Ukraine is forced to come to a settlement. We know that Trump has said that he will end the war within a week, which, although that's basically impossible, it does mean that he probably intends to force Ukraine to negotiate. And I think that would be a good way of doing so. He could also loosen sanctions on Russia. And so that could be an indirect way of forcing the settlement. But once again, the issue for Trump is that he could have obstructions from within his own government. And so I would say the most prudent thing to do is just to wait and see. I think it's too early now to really know what would happen. But what do you guys think? What do you think is the most likely option that he would do? We could start off with you, Alessandro Bergamo.
Well, I think actually first, before answering, I just want a quick answer from you. Do you genuinely believe the EU has not helped Ukraine in a meaningful way? Because some people would say by sending weapons, it allowed Ukraine to defend itself. Others would say, well, in reality, nothing is being changed because Ukraine is not capable of pushing Russia out, but at the same time, Russia is not capable of pushing Ukraine to basically on its knees.
Well, what I mean by that is just that when you think about the fact that it's Europe that is directly affected by this, a lot of European and EU countries and NATO countries directly border Russia, and all of this, you have to wonder how come proportionally there has been so little aid. When you think about how the EU has over twice the population of the US, but is giving like half the amount of aid that the US is giving, that really does bring up some questions. And I think it's because the EU is, as an organization, is made up of many countries with totally different interests. Spain, France, Portugal, they might not feel very threatened by Russia. But of course, we see the Eastern EU countries, like Finland, Estonia, Latvia, those countries are giving like proportionally more to Ukraine than even the US is. So that's sort of what I meant by that.
Okay. Well, I just have a quick answer to you, which is Trump, like if you could put some milestones, this would be the first milestone on his presidency, which is to end the war, since he genuinely ran on this point. So I'm not sure if he's gonna do it in 1 week, but the fact that he's capable of saying, now you two, Zelensky and Putin, sit down and let's have a chat and let's see if we can compromise. Independent of what you think, that's a diplomatic move, and I agree with that because diplomacy, we're all for diplomacy until we're not. And so the first step of diplomacy is to being capable of sitting down even with people that you disagree with. Because the alternative is war, and I'm not sure that's the best case. But Ale, give us your thoughts on this, and then we can move on to the defense union.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, and I also agree with I think it was Medvedev comment last day from Russia where he said Trump is a businessman. He's gonna do good things for the Ukrainian situation, Ukrainian diaspora, and I agree on that because probably Trump is gonna put the U.S. interest first. Meaning having good relationship with Russia, which is the contender, the other superpower, together with China and now India. It wants to have good relationship with the European Union, so it cannot go against what the European Union tries to do with Ukraine. As well, he has to manage all those in the United States, so domestically, who are both against or pro-Ukraine. So I think it will some kind of do cost benefit analysis, so what he can achieve. He will try to have negotiations between the two. I'm sure he could put Zelensky and Putin on the same table and negotiate with them. And I think the crisis will not be solved in, as you said, in 1 week, or as he said actually in 1 week, but probably there will be months before it. But still, I think I see a silver lining actually. Different is a situation regarding the defense union, the European defense union, and NATO actually stuff, because we know that NATO has been discussed a lot during Trump's campaign, has been criticized a lot, and this has galvanized, I can say, concerns and also discussions about a European defense union here in Europe. Again, we have 3 possible scenarios, starting with the worst one. We have a complete withdrawal of the United States from NATO. It is very unlikely, obviously, but I mean, this scenario sees the United States withdrawing from the organization, from the Atlantic Alliance, deciding not to engage anymore with it, stopping sending money, troops, and so on and so forth. He also, I remember, he proposed to remove all American troops from Germany and move them to the US European Command, and move the European Command in Belgium. And I think it will continue the relationship militarily with those states which are aligned to the United States. I mean, right now, probably in Europe, just Poland, partially Turkey, I don't know, or actually Hungary with Orban. But I mean, as I said, this is very worst case and very unlikely. Then we have the best case, where Trump stays dedicated to defending NATO. There is no real change in policy from the United States point of view. There is no pressure on the other allies regarding the expense, the defense budget. But I see this probably more unlikely than the worst case. And then we have probably the most realistic case, which is the one where Trump will pressure his allies, will put a lot of pressure to Europeans in terms of increasing the defense budget, maybe also overcoming that 2% which it requires, and making those states which are not yet at the 2% reaching it. This obviously could cause some panic amongst NATO states who see Trump as unreliable. And this is precisely what, as I said, galvanized discussions about the European Defense Union. I've wrote an article about this, and most parties of the new European elections in 2024 believed it is necessary to establish a European Defense Union, precisely because we cannot rely, I talk as a European, we cannot rely too much on the United States for our defense and security, or at least we cannot do that anymore. Taking back the 3 scenarios, if we take the worst one, this may lead the EU to swiftly push towards a European mechanism of common defense, as proposed by many parties, like the EPP, with a new EU Commissary of Defense and also EU Defense Council. If we take the best case, probably there will be the status quo also in Europe, nothing will change. If we take the realistic case, probably at the beginning there would be the status quo, but in the meantime Europeans could continue discussions and debate to achieve a common defense system. What do you think, guys, about it?
Micah?
Yeah, well, I mostly agree with what you're saying here. I do think that, yeah, the EU shouldn't solely rely on the US for defense. Firstly, just for the reason that all countries should be able to defend themselves. And secondly, because, yes, under Trump, it does look like the US will pivot less from Europe and more towards Asia, especially because they now see China as their principal threat. So I would say, yes, some kind of EU defense union would definitely make sense. I am quite skeptical, though, of the Europeans being able to pull this off. I mean, even when they faced their most existential threat, which is right now, they have still done remarkably little to coordinate and come together. So I'm not very hopeful on that front, but I do think perhaps that the threat of the US leaving, even more than the threat of Russia invading, might be what finally gets the EU to put their act together.
Well, to Macron's disappointment, because he's very vocal about a stronger EU and perhaps a defense union, I don't think it makes sense. Because logically, okay, yes, it does make sense since we're all Europeans, we all should defend each other, and everything is fine. But in a practical sense, it's like saying, why would I need to buy, I don't know, like a second bodyguard when I already have 10 bodyguards and that would be NATO? It's just too much. It doesn't make sense to me. If NATO is in place, then the European Defense Union is redundant.
Yeah, I can agree on that. Especially in the worst case scenario, you imagine the United States withdraw from NATO. There's no point in moving to the European Defense Union. You just stick with NATO without the United States, and apart from Canada, that's basically the European Defense Union per se. So yeah.
Yep.
Now we can move on to the implications for the Middle East with Israel and with Iran.
Yeah, so basically starting with Israel, we know that it's a long-standing ally of the United States. Not that much under Biden's administration. We know we had controversies between Biden and Netanyahu, but for sure with Trump, as we said before, the reaction of Netanyahu was pretty swift. Basically, Netanyahu said that Trump, actually said that he would get over with what is happening. We would achieve peace. He would stop killing people. We remember that during his first term, Trump offered broad support to Israel, to Netanyahu and the leaders, including unilaterally withdrawing from a deal meant to rein in Iran's nuclear program, the JCPOA. Trump also during his first term recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, which is pretty symbolic. Bolstering also its claim over the disputed city, and he also recognized Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights, capture from Syria. I think this time probably Trump would act similarly, but also differently, meaning he would not tolerate the war in the way Netanyahu is conducting it, meaning with poor strategies, with poor risk or impact assessment, so going with tanks, bombings, and killing innocents, civilians. He would like try to convince Netanyahu to assess better operations before conducting them. And he actually, there are allegations I've read these days on many newspapers that Trump may tell Netanyahu to declare victory. And then he would mediate between Netanyahu and Abbas, so Palestine, to find an agreement so that everything goes back to, we can say, normal, if it can be called normal. Some are scared he would allow an Israeli enlargement, which would terminate a possibility of a two-state solution. But as I said, for sure, it will not allow Netanyahu to play with Gaza as he's doing right now. I think not much because he cares about Palestinians' life, actually, but more because of the public image of the United States around the war. So he wants to have good relationship with the other in the world and not pass as the one allowing the killings.
I was saddened by the fate of the Palestinian people. They deserve a far better life. They deserve the chance to achieve their extraordinary potential. Palestinians have been trapped in a cycle of terrorism, poverty, and violence, exploited by those seeking to use them as pawns to advance terrorism and extremism.
I'll just give a quick comment on this, that if I were the US, I would still obviously have an alliance with Israel. So I would simply tell Netanyahu to cut the snake's head off, like he's been doing lately, and just do whatever he has to do. Well, again, that's not what I would do personally, but if I were the US, do whatever you have to do, but do it quickly, put it an end, and then let's start the negotiations. Also, because Gaza is very well destroyed. There's basically nothing left, and to me, it doesn't make sense to prolong the war even more, seeing how they're basically breeding new terrorists due to the many people who died and many civilians. Moving on to Iran, I think here this is probably one of the strongest points for foreign policy because Trump, as we all know, was the only person on earth who decided to put Iran in its place through killing Soleimani. That was a message, that was a really strong message. Therefore, I think he's going to do the same once more, which is why, by the way, I don't know if you two know this, but there were some attempted assassinations by Iran and some interferences by Iran during the campaign of Trump, which does not surprise me because that shows they're scared and they're very scared. I'm assuming that there could be, now maybe it's like a 30% chance, 40% chance, I don't know, but not too much, that they could do a joint war or at least a joint strike on Iran with Israel, since Iran has been really pumping up those numbers of uranium, which entails they want to have a nuclear arsenal, and Trump has stated it multiple times that Iran with a nuclear arsenal is a threat not to the Middle East, not to the US, but to the whole world. Micah, give us a quick thought on this.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with your assessment here that I think that because Iran, is trying to assassinate Trump and to some extent interfered in the elections, although I don't think that's as meaningful, definitely shows that they're scared. And I also think Hamas is scared too. I didn't get to comment this when you guys were talking about that, but I was watching a video earlier today about how Hamas actually like immediately proposed a ceasefire right after they found out Trump won the election. And I think it's because both of them understand that Trump's here to do business, so to say. And so he's not going to, let them have their way. Trump is respected in a way that Biden wasn't. And so I definitely believe that, yeah, Trump will, renew pressure, right? We saw that he withdrew from the Iran deal last time. As to strikes on Iran, I could definitely see the US and Israel both doing that. Whether it's coordinated or not, I don't know. And whether they will try to strike something nuclear, I'm not aware of that. But I definitely see a possibility of a joint American-Israeli strike on Iran and killing more Iranian, high-profile leaders in the future.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Before moving on to Saudi, just a quick comment. I honestly I have a different opinion of you guys because I think it will not like bomb Iran. I see Iran too much tied and entangled with BRICS, so with Russia and China right now, that Trump could not use the same we can say aggressive policy as his first term in terms of military. He can be aggressive diplomatically, but not that much militarily, I think, just because of the ties that there are right now with Russia and China from Iran. But I mean, that's just my opinion. Moving on to Saudi Arabia, we know that bin Salman was the dearest friend after Netanyahu, Trump's dearest friend after Netanyahu in the Middle East. I remember that meme where like he touched his shoulder when it is forbidden actually in Saudi to touch the prince. And the relations between Saudi Arabia and the US under Trump's first term flourished. There have been many agreements between the two countries, especially militarily, the great collaboration in the war in Syria and especially in the one in Yemen. Also, in terms of in the Arabian Peninsula, with the United Arab Emirates, there was a good cooperation in the first Trump's term. There has been also contacts during Trump's, we can say, rest these 4 years. And so I think that the relationship between Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and the United States will go back as normal during Trump's first term. And by normal, I mean the great achievement of the Abraham Accord, which was an historical milestone for the United States and especially for Israel and the Arab countries. It was, I think, the first time some Arab countries, I do not remember which one specifically, I think it was the United Arab Emirates, recognized the sovereignty of Israel. So it was pretty important. Right now, as I said, there's BRICS in the Middle East, which like sort of shuffles the card. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates were both invited to join the BRICS. Saudi Arabia was granted also dialogue in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Riyadh has kind of normalized relationships with Tehran. So I think due to Biden's poor administration of Middle East, United States has lost a bit of leverage with Saudi, differently from Israel, obviously. And now there's also Qatar as a crucial actor, especially in terms of the Gaza war, which Trump has to consider. For sure, I believe that Trump will put some pressure on those states, especially more than Biden. And he will try to implement and continue with the Abraham Accord to keep the region under control and to keep his friend Netanyahu safe there.
Let me just jump in, just a really quick thing, then we can move on to China. I think it's been proven that Trump is unpredictable and he might have some trick up his sleeve. And I understand your point that now Iran is closer to BRICS, but I don't think that's gonna stop Trump. He's like a gangster. You can't really predict him. So we'll see.
All right. And so now with that discussed, let's look at some of the implications for China. So we first will look at the Republic of China, also known as Taiwan. And then we're going to look at the People's Republic of China, which is the one and only true China. Oh, anyways. So it is possible that Trump recognizes Taiwan's independence, but that is a very risky move because, of course, China, the PRC, right, does not recognize Taiwan's independence, and that would be considered a highly aggressive act. But the reason I'm saying this is because Trump has already said before that he sort of does not recognize the idea of the one China policy, right? So that there can only be one China. And so that's why I bring that up, although I don't think it's too likely. But we also see that because of Trump's foreign policy, he might not see Taiwan as useful or necessary ally because Trump sort of sees allies as either, contributing to America or not contributing to America. So Taiwan offers little to America except their semiconductors. So that is something to keep in mind. But also Trump is very anti-China. And so for that reason, he could actually boost Taiwan more than even Biden did. But because Trump has said little about Taiwan or China this time around, we just have to wait and see. And so now let's look at some of Trump's economic policies with China. So it is likely that Trump will, I guess, continue/restart his trade war with China. Joe Biden actually changed very little as compared to Trump with his approach to China, but is likely that Trump, of course, will still be a bit more aggressive towards China than Biden was. And what will this look like? Well, of course, we know Trump loves tariffs, so I think he will definitely continue to increase tariffs on Chinese goods, everything from washing machines to steel, for example. And so this will make both states less dependent on each other, which is what Trump wants. This will also be counteracted then by a policy known as friendshoring, which is basically moving your industry and moving American companies to friendlier countries. So two of the biggest examples are Mexico and Vietnam. And despite Trump's issues with Mexico, that is probably going to continue to happen. Mexico, I think, recently became the US's largest trade partner. It is also possible that some kind of political and economic alliance will be organized with the aim of closing off non-essential trade with China. So we're thinking Philippines, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan here. But that is a bit hard to predict. And then finally, there are potential sanctions that will be imposed on certain Chinese officials because of their human rights abuses. Now, Trump doesn't really care that much about human rights, but on the other hand, it is also true that he will use that as an excuse to punish China. So perhaps the Uyghurs or Hong Kong would be something here. So what do you guys think about Trump's potential approach to China?
Well, I think, and again, this is controversial, that starting a new trade war with China is not the best approach. I am a firm believer of negotiations and of trade. So I would put, and this again is controversial, human rights second to trade. And I would actually want the US to come closer to China or to Russia, one of the two, and try to give them more interests to join, okay, join no, but to be more lenient with the West, because we need to isolate actors, and having trade wars just does not help anyone. I think I'm not sure because I don't remember right now, but I have read some papers saying that tariffs are not that effective. So this is probably a point where I don't really agree with Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer may be in the middle between what Micah said and what you are saying, Ale, meaning that I understand your point and I agree with the fact that negotiation is important. Yesterday, I have seen the film, the movie, Trump's movie, The Apprentice and The Apprentice, and he said that like negotiation is an art, so he would probably negotiate with China. But at the same time, it will continue sort of a trade war, maybe not as harsh as the first one during his first term. But at the same time, he always stated that he wants to protect American workers. He initially did that with the USMCA. We discussed it in the first episode, in the first part of this episode. And he will probably continue to defend American workers, especially for steel, cars, aluminum, and so on and so forth, through specific actions, measures which will favor US products over Chinese or foreign products in general. So it will put some, like, I think, trade measures to pursue that. But I mean, as you said, it's too unpredictable and it's too early to understand that. Probably also who is going to nominate specifically for trade, for relations will also give us indications about how Trump is gonna behave.
I have a question for Micah. Do you think that it's going to be a new Trump here? What do I mean by this? 2016 Trump was fairly aggressive with China, but using his words, they respected each other. Do you think Trump 2.0 will go nuts with the China and absolutely try to destabilize that country?
It's an interesting question. I'm inclined to say no, just because I don't believe that Trump is actually very reckless as a person. He just appears unpredictable so that he sort of has leverage over people. And also, I'm sure that Trump is aware that during his presidency, that is China's peak time to invade Taiwan due to their demographic situation. So I believe that, yeah, he probably maybe will do some CIA operation to encourage some kind of protest there, but I don't think he'll do anything reckless.
Wait, sorry. You believe that during Trump's presidency, that's the prime time for China to invade Taiwan?
Yes,
Wouldn't
yes,
you
and
argue the
I
opposite?
will explain why, because you have two things that come together. First of all, Xi Jinping is getting old, and even though, yeah, he has basically made himself president for life, I do think that, just like Putin, he understands his time is coming out, and so just like in Russia, the way for Chinese leaders to get respected is by, making their country great, and of course, reunifying the country would be a great way to do that. And the second thing that comes alongside this is China just reached peak population. Its population is only going to decline from now on, and that means there are going to be less and less soldiers every year. Older population, so even the soldiers you do have are too old. And so it makes sense that now would be the good time to invade. And by now, I mean specifically 2027, 2028, 2026. Yeah.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
could it be possible to have Ukraine end, and then as soon as Ukraine ends, we have a new war, and that's with Taiwan? Although I think if Taiwan
Yeah.
happens, sorry, then just one more thing. If a war in Taiwan happens, unless Trump does not send a lot of the American army, that's going to be much worse. I think that's going to have much more of a global implication, because like that's where I would actually say things could go nuclear.
Oh yeah, 100%, because the US almost certainly would defend Taiwan. And yeah, I mean, when you think about how far the US is logistically from Taiwan, they'd have to send over more people. It would be much more contentious for China. This is like the primary issue. So I definitely think it would go down very badly. So I do think Trump will try not to provoke China in order to avoid that, but he'll also have to maintain a very strong stance to prevent them from thinking they have a chance now.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. Ale, give us your final thoughts and then we can wrap it up.
I mean, I think in general with China, I will try to keep things as peaceful as possible, as well as obviously promoting American interests first. Regarding Taiwan, I don't know. I don't remember. It was the deadline for Xi Jinping to attack Taiwan. I think it was 100 years after the existence of the birth of the PRC. I don't remember. It's 2040 or 49. I don't know. I don't remember, but. I think that in case the Chinese invasion of Taiwan happens, it would be much easier and much faster than Russia with Ukraine, both because China is way better than now militarily than Russia, and Taiwan is way smaller and weaker than Ukraine. So, I mean, even if like Ukraine, Europe, America, whatever support Taiwan, I think Taiwan will get destroyed much easier and faster than Ukraine, sorry. And with that said, guys, we come to the end of the second part of the episode on the US elections. Thanks, Mike, again for being with us in these 2 episodes. We really hope to have you again for other videos.
Thanks, guys. I truly enjoyed recording these 2 episodes, exploring many interesting topics. And don't forget to check out my channel, The Traditionalist, and watch my latest video there.
Thank you for the shameless plugin. Pleasure was ours. In the meantime, guys, remember to give a look to Micah's YouTube channel, as you already said, and naturally follow us on our social media, Instagram and LinkedIn, Network Studenti Sicurezza Italiani, or NSSI, on YouTube, but you're probably already on YouTube, unless you're on Spotify, and our podcast platforms. And
see you next
time.